Okay, so I'm just going to move us on, everybody. Like I say, if you didn't quite manage to join today's session just then, there will obviously be plenty of opportunity for that later on as well. But just to kind of introduce Bruce here. So Bruce is an associate lecturer in economics at the University of Aberystwyth. So Bruce has worked within higher education for around about 5 years now. And actually the University of Aberystwyth is an institution that we at Vevox have worked with for quite some time now. So we have a very good relationship with Aberystwyth University. They've also been quite pivotal in a number of sort of developments and enhancements into the platform. So yeah, really happy and excited to have Bruce with us here today, who's kindly given up his time to come and obviously speak to you all around his uses and applications of Vevox. And specifically, Bruce has a real sort of emphasis and motivation for sort of technology in enhanced learning, obviously hence the application of Vevox. So I think with that, Bruce, I'm actually going to hand over to you now, and we can go ahead and get started.
Bit of an overview for myself. The whole reason why I'm running this session is luckily I've actually been able to use Vevox during my kind of very early on teaching career so far. And then as I've been moving forward through my own teaching development, I have found that essentially students are becoming more and more digitized, if that makes sense. So naturally, what I've tried to do is actually incorporate all these digital technologies into my lecture sessions. And one of the ways I will show you today is how I've actually used it for icebreaking. And in that case, you have to kind of picture it in the sense of it's the first years, you're coming in, it's their first ever lecture. They've never been into universities before. A lot of them are quite shy, in my opinion, nowadays. And a lot of them need that kind of little bit of a kick over, kind of the first nudge, kick's the wrong word, the first nudge to get them involved in the teaching environment. And particularly, you know, implications of the pandemic and things like that, a lot of them, more of them are much more introverted than they used to be. So to give you a bit of an overview today, I'm going to try and run this simultaneously. So I'll be flicking back and forth between Vevox and the PowerPoint slide. So hopefully, if this works really well, you should now be able to see what are you most keen to hear about or learn about in this session. And this is one of the initial icebreakers between myself and you as my seminar cohort for today. And I will quickly flick through, you know, again, obviously talking about icebreakers today, effective icebreakers, engagement icebreakers, integration into PowerPoints. I'll let Fraser talk about that slightly later on because I don't personally do that. Creative use of Vevox. Yeah, okay, good. Everyone's sort of in the right place then. It does seem like everyone's got the right kind of thing here. Just going back to the slides here. So kind of an outline. I've already familiarized yourself with who I am, which is good. I'll then kind of talk through how I utilize it. I'll then talk about the actual balance of using Vevox and not overusing it or not underusing it. I like to kind of have a very nice balance between. Unfortunately, today, I don't actually have members of my student classes to come give you their kind of interpretation of what it is. But I'll give you the short anecdote of what they said last December when I ran this session similarly. I'll then talk about the challenges of what you might encounter. You know, you might get some trolls in the classroom. You know, some people that like to, you know, give some poor choice of language and those kind of things. And I'll tell you how I overcame them. Conclusions are my tips and tricks, which I can see somebody's asking me, what are your tips and tricks to get involved? And I'll go for that today. And then naturally, when we get towards the end of the session, hopefully about 35 on the clock, we'll go from there. So that's kind of the outline of what today is. So how can we actually introduce ourselves using Vevox? I will now flick back to the Vevox and show you how I did this in my first ever session. So it's great to see 20 people have actually gone straight away and actually getting involved. I'll move forward onto the next part of my Vevox presentation. So before I actually say who I am, one of the best icebreakers I actually use is what do you have for lunch? I ran this in the morning the last time, so it was what did you have for breakfast? So let's just see straight away, what did you have for lunch this afternoon? And you'll kind of see what is going on here. So I've got a few people on burritos, veggies, soup, yet to eat now. So obviously you've been running after the seminar to go get it. Soup with an unhappy face. And straight away, it's not necessarily what you've actually had for lunch, but what you can do and what you can use Vevox for is actually getting people more involved. I'm not asking for anything too personal in this case. I'm just simply asking what you've actually done in your day. And this is quite an effective way to get your students thinking about how they can actually engage in your classroom. Hopefully, I know one person in today's seminar has actually said they've not yet to eat their lunch. But if you pick a kind of time of the day, say you've got a morning lecture, you go, what did you have for breakfast? What did you have for lunch? What did you have for dinner? If you've got quite a late on lecture. And this is one way to actually break the ice initially. So once I've done this, and this, again, this is very much a run through of what I have done in the past. And this is how you can start to see how I've got it to work. I've asked you what you've had for lunch now. Naturally, I've not really told you much about myself yet, have I? So what I go then is, who am I? So, you know, random photo of a lecture room, include yourself in this normally. And I'll give them a multiple choice question in this case to say, right, am I Bruce White? Am I economics lecturer? And you're presented for this session today. And hopefully, I can see a few people are starting to get confused already, but I am all of the above in this case. And you can use this as effectively as you like in this case. And it reduces that kind of, oh, I'm not just Bruce White, I'm also your lecturer. I might be a personal tutor to some of the students in attendance. What I quite like to do, being based in Aberystwyth in this case, is essentially you'll basically meet one of your students walking to and from. So, oh, I helped one of my students last year in this case find the library, find the lecture room itself. And this is what I would normally include in this session at this point, okay? So hopefully this is one way to actually show you how the ice can be broken. So I'm glad to see 30 of you are getting really involved with this. Perfect. This is exactly what it is aimed to do so. Right, moving forward. Again, done in a slight reverse order. You've already seen how I would actually introduce myself, and that's how I would introduce myself using Vevox at this stage, okay? And normally at this point of the presentation, I'll be like, right, any questions at this point? But we're going to carry on. We'll do questions at the end. If you do have any questions, put it in the Q&A Vevox panel, and Fraser will run through it as a bit of a sort of, you know, Q&A session after 35 minutes. So this is now the kind of history, the familiarization and the utilization of what I've done. In most of the lectures I teach, I do like to use interactive polling software, in this case, Vevox. I have used others in the past, such as Mentimeter and Kahoot, but Vevox being integrated into Aberystwyth is the one I've personally used, and I'm actually quite a big advocate for it because, you know, you can throw students in the deep end. As I put on the slide, one of my favorite activities to do is essentially have an exam style question. I'll give my students 25 minutes to actually answer the exam style question, and then we'll go through the answers, and I'll give them instant feedback going, right, you need to elaborate more on this point. And you can use it in that sense. And that's away from the icebreakers, that's more to do with the learning. So we're going to go back into the icebreakers now. And just to show you how much I have been using it, there is a screenshot of every single presentation I've done over the course of the last year. You can see the polar bear one in the top left-hand corner of that list today. And I like to use them consistently as a good teaching activity. So how do I get my students familiarized with the software? So again, we'll be able to parts, tips and tricks later, but in this sense, the best way I've found is literally going, right, who am I? Get them involved straight away on the screen. The one I like to do in person, so it's a little bit different today doing on an actual virtual seminar because I can't see any of your lovely faces today. I'll go, right, hands up in the room, who's got a phone? Naturally, 99% of the room goes, yep, yeah, I've got a phone. I go, right, great, keep your phone out. Get on your phone, open up Vevox, and then the first question of the day will be something silly, which we'll go into in just a second. So, and I'll show you these silliness now. I'm trying to get it to flow together so we can go back and forth between the Vevox here. Here are 4 of my icebreakers that I've used in the past, and naturally I'll get you to do them today. So we're going to flick back to the Vevox now. So one of the icebreakers, what TV shows are you currently watching? So again, I'll give you about 30 seconds to respond in here. Again, and this is quite a good point now where 9 times out of 10, I won't actually know half the things on there. But as you can see straight away, a flood of answers. And, you know, some of you put in none. That's fair enough. You know, not enough time as academic staff or within your commercial roles in that sense. Stranger Things season 3, SEAL Team 6, you know, and this is where, again, the one I'm going to expect to see is Rings of Power and the new House of Dragon Game of Thrones. And that's what I typically expect to see going forward. And I'll stop it there because plenty of you are answering, and this is great to see. And, you know, I now start to get a flavor of the cohort here today. And I'll get exactly the same flavor when I go into my classroom in a week or two's time. So how can we introduce ourselves using Vevox? And I'll leave this as an open-ended question. Hopefully within this already, I've tried to put this as an interactive session already. How would you introduce yourself? I'm not asking you to actually introduce yourself, but would you do it in a similar style? What are you going to do today? So ask a question, guess which facts are correct about me, say hi in a Q&A, good. MCQs, ask a question. Yep, perfect. Again, all good ways of doing so. I'm happy with that. Ask about the lecture. Word cloud, I'm not sure I understand this question. That's fine, yeah. 2 truths, a lie is a classic. Guessing game, quiz, question mark, do I have a pet? Yeah. What kind of bread do you feel like right now? That's quite a nice one, it's quite a good one. Fantastic in that sense. Good. 3 of the 4 statements below are true. Pin on a world map. Right, perfect. And you already start to generate your own ideas here. And I'm just seeing if this is actually translating across from a seminar standpoint at this stage. There's ideas. Yeah, good. I realised two of my questions are not in the order that I thought they were. So we're now going to flick back for 2 seconds of how many Vevox polls have I used since September 30th, 2021? This is just a different way of looking at essentially, can I use a different question on Vevox to actually engage my class? So for those of you that might be teaching mathematical subjects, you can actually use, timelines like this where, guess a value between a certain set of numbers here. So hopefully if anybody in the sort of mathematical side of things, you can start going from there. And ideally, and again, it's really weird every single time I've done this, that, you get people down here on the left-hand side voting for 1, and you get people on the really high side voting for the absolute max value. And I don't know why it's the thing. There's definitely something about the law of averages written in here, but the correct answer in this case is actually 33. And I can't just, that's incredibly strange. Yeah, I've used 33 and the average today is 32.7, which rounds up to 33. I'm taking that as a win. Simple as that. Okay. And that's just another way to get you involved. And then you can start to think about how I actually use Vevox. You start to get a flavor of what I am myself. And we'll go from there. And for the next 3 Vevox questions, I'm going to just sort of show you the kind of the ins and outs of what I've actually done in terms of my lectures in that sense. Okay. So I'm just checking everyone can still see me. So, and what I mean by this one here is this is my go-to classic, because this will normally, if you're in a classroom full of 90 students, if you go to them, would you rather fight 2 bear-sized ducks, 10 duck-sized horses, or 1 horse-sized bear? Everyone will get involved. And I've never had this question fail on me. I'll show you 1 or 2 that did fail on me, and I'll show you a bit later on. But with this, it normally generates a debate. And straight away now, it's a little bit silly. You've taken the absolute, formal level of just being involved in lecturing. You are the lecturer. You're there to teach. You want to break the ice down, get everyone involved, and just simply go, you know what, let's have a bit of a silly discussion for the first 10 minutes. And then you can go into your actual content later on. So good, I think. Yeah, okay, perfect. We've got 35 out of 44 respondents. So again, really, really high hit rate. I'm really happy with that. I can normally do the maths in my head, but 42 people is a little bit weird maths. So we've got a few people involved in the 1 horse-sized bear. And this is where I normally go, right, anybody willing to put their hand up and go, right, why would you fight 1 horse-sized bear? And then you can have a bit of discussion about that. Obviously, personally, 1 massive horse-sized bear, that's crazy. What's going on? And then a similar thing with 2 bear-sized ducks. They are huge ducks with massive beaks. What are you going to do? And commonly, what you tend to find is the 10 duck-sized horses is the majority answer, as it is here today. Okay. And that's just one way to go through. And I can answer a few questions on that later if it's an appropriate kind of thing going through. And I'll kind of not go into as much time on these with the rest of these questions before I go into tips and tricks, but ones I've used in the past. Would you rather listen to Ariana Grande or Justin Bieber for the rest of your life? Again, feel free to answer it. I'll leave it open for like 30 odd seconds. Again, we've got very 50-50 split down the middle here. That's fine. 30. We've got Ariana Grande winning out here. I think when I did this with my students last year, Ariana Grande won by about a 70-30 split. But today we are completely neutral, 17 apiece down the middle between these two. And hopefully with this, and to give you kind of the context of the question, with the would you rather, what you're trying to do there is get people to go on one side or the other. And I'll talk about a question slightly later on that didn't really work in this case. So we'll move forward. Ariana Grande wins that just about 53-47-ish. Why do would you rather questions work? Again, I'll put this as a question for you out to the Vevox today to kind of generate your own thoughts and stimulate your own kind of thinking around it. But to kind of give you the explanation that I think that works well is you are splitting hopefully the classroom into, right, you give them a minute to think about this question on the board. Are you going to be part of Team Justin Bieber or Team Ariana Grande? Or in this case, are you going to be, duck-sized horses, horse-sized ducks, or bear-sized ducks, and those kind of things? And yeah, straight away, I can see, go in the middle, you're picking a side. No right, wrong answers. A great one, thought-provoking, perfect. It's all hypothetical as well. One of the biggest tips, and it will come again in later, is essentially when you're asking these ice-breaking questions, try and make them as least controversial as possible, okay? You don't want it to be about anyone's political opinion, about anybody's sort of socioeconomical background. You want them to be in a hypothetical fantasy land. You want it to be about an activity they've been doing. So, eating stuff for breakfast. It's a common ground. Everybody normally eats breakfast. Same thing with eating lunch. In a hypothetical world, you're never going to be fighting various animals of different sizes, but hopefully it just provokes a thought and gets them going, where am I going to be in this case? And a similar thing as well, go for two fairly well-known people in terms of those are two pop stars from recent years, within the last 2 to 3 years, and get them to choose a side. Good. And yeah, everybody's on the same page today. Yeah. You need some speech marks in the question. Yeah, good. And good. You get feedback, and this is where we can lead on here. And then the last few for today, again, is my email one of these? And this is not just an icebreaker, but also quite a good factoid for them to get involved with in this stage. I deliberately put this in here because one of the most common questions I've been asked in the last couple of years is, what is your email? So, you know, I've told them who I am. I've told you my name. I've told you what I lecture in. I've told you various other information about myself at this point. In this case, the good thing about it is all these emails technically reach me. So you can actually email them with any of these, and whichever one they remember the best they used to. I do try and get them to use my main email of the RW26 because that's the best one for them in this stage. Okay, right, perfect. Now I'm going to flip back to the PowerPoint for another about 10 minutes or so. And again, here's a bit of a history lesson as well. You can see where I've used before. So again, if you look on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can see 65% to about 35% Team Ariana Grande versus Justin Bieber. And you'll just notice, again, I teach a very large cohort at this stage, so I have about 100 students in the classroom. I've got about 80 of them on this Vevox, and for me, that's a really good kind of hit rate. You know, if you ever get every single student engaged, again, I'll applaud you, very well done to you, but to get that many involved, actually actively engaging with myself, perfect. And then you'll see, again, as we'll go through, which have a pet unicorn or a pet dragon. We're in Wales here. I'll be very surprised if unicorn went out, but yeah, pet dragon is kind of the go-to for a lot of my students are Welsh, so pet dragons are cooler. Also, House of Dragon, those various things will come up again. And then the last one, and this one is I mentioned slightly earlier on, would you rather cover yourself in peanut butter or ketchup? And this for me was a bit of a weird one in the classroom. I had a lot of students go, all these like kind of reactions and those sort of emotions, but that was the one where it's borderline, and I went, I'll cut that one out from future ones. But as you can see, I still had 83 responses. In this case, it was very much like a 60-40 split. And for everybody that picked ketchup and not peanut butter, is because they had a peanut butter allergy and those kind of things. Also, just I then had to put a food warning in next week. If you've got, you know, food allergies, make us aware. Don't bring peanuts into class and those kind of things. Again, another way of breaking the ice in this sense. So moving forward, about halfway through the PowerPoint now. For those of you that hopefully use this in the future, it's also a very good way of getting feedback. So, you know, you've broken the ice, you've done all these things, you've introduced yourself, and then hopefully this will then lead to better feedback for yourself. In this case, you can see here, as you can kind of read through, it was a morning lecture, so you'll notice halfway down, bring bacon butties. You'll notice as well, it actually gives me some good feedback. You know, I need to break down the mathematical content a lot slower. They want practice materials. And this is all because they are more comfortable to actually just tell me this very honestly. If you haven't guessed it, during that first week of term, I actually lost my voice, hence why bad throat, still enjoyed it. They had some feedback about themselves there. You know, bring 2 bottles of water, bring more water, you know, go through an example about crunchy bars. It gives me that right kind of feedback to then I went and did a video after, and it's those kind of things. Right, perfect. I am keeping to time just about. So at this stage, normally I would have one of my lovely students to pass over to them, but they are unfortunately unavailable because term has not started here yet. But to kind of give you the review and flavor of how I've actually utilized Vevox in this case, it very much became the level of like, if Verity was here today and Dylan was here today, they very much say, right, you're known as that lecturer that is using Vevox in his sessions. We know that to bring our phones in. We know that we're going to have to be engaged all the way through. To quote Verity back on herself, she said that if she was ever invited to my wedding down the line, she would still bring a phone because she knows she's going to be having a Vevox to do. And it's that kind of a level. I took it as a joke naturally, but then am I really using Vevox that much? But hopefully it's been used in the right way. Going on to challenges now. So these are sort of the questions that I get asked typically, and I've not checked the Q&A board in this sense, but how do I actually get the students to utilize the digital platform? I think this is actually in what you wanted from the session today. In this case, you know, as I said earlier, hands up at the start of the session, go, you know, right, you're on your phones, go to Vevox, do the icebreaker questions, get them involved, and then start asking them about the lecture content. In terms of the classroom environment, there are downsides to actually having phones out, obviously distraction devices. So if somebody's on the phone, typically they're probably texting a friend, you know, social networking, doing all those things. if I can get them back onto the Vevox and actually engage with the kind of lecture content I want them to do, and this is a way to do it, I see that as a big positive. Personally, that's the best way to actually keep them engaged with what I want them to be learning about. And hopefully they're not flicking off, you know, Snapchatting friends or whatever is TikTok nowadays. I don't personally use TikTok, but I think that's the main one. And then the other side is, do they actually have a digital device anyway? In this case, if you don't bring a digital device, I literally go very back to traditional, right, hands up in the room, has anybody got a answer to a question? So I'll be asking them about supply and demand curves. I'll be like, what point is profit maximized? What is the best production? Those kind of things. But we're not teaching economics today. It's just to break that down. For those students in the classroom that are much more shy, you know, the hands up in the room can be very daunting. So for me, that Vevox kind of interaction nature in the classroom gives those students that don't necessarily want to actually raise their voice to go, right, I'll quickly tell them on my phone, you know, they can write any answer they want. And, you know, you get some very silly answers, and I'll talk about a challenge again in a second. You get some very silly answers, you get some answers that aren't really quite close to the content that you want them to actually be talking about, but at least they've actually had the opportunity to answer in this case. So in terms of a teaching device, it can be very useful in that case. One of the other challenges I did find was obviously when you do these icebreaker questions, and we've had it a little bit today as well, but you get some very kind of silly answers that are nowhere near. You'll notice it on the graph of somebody picking 50 as a maximum, somebody picking 1. And then you kind of, if you go into the free text answers, you can get people that are not saying necessarily appropriate things. Not selling Vevox for you, but there are profanity filters on there. So hopefully Fraser can talk about that again in a second. But you tailor it so you can use it effectively for what you need to do in your teaching environment. Okay. I'm just making sure I'm not overrunning to time. So my kind of conclusions, and I'll go into some top tips. It's incredibly useful to have a platform where your students can anonymously engage. You can also identify each student as well. So for those trolls you may get, you can actually identify who's saying what specifically. I did have a few issues as the nature went from very, very formal at the start of the year, used the icebreakers, became more and more informal, and then had to make it formal again, saying, right, if you're going to use this, and we're going to use it effectively, particularly when I was running online sessions, we have to make sure there's a clear boundary of like everyone is focused in and you're not just saying absolute rubbish on the kind of Vevox in that sense. One of the best things I found was actually developing the confidence. So, you know, I've asked them an exam style question at this stage. They've gone out with possibly an answer that's not the world's best answer you've ever asked for, but at least they've attempted it. And then I literally will have it up in the background. So today you obviously see I've kind of talked through the answers they go through. They then actually had the chance to get that feedback through. So you've gone from the initial session of talking about icebreakers, and you've developed their confidence in the sense that they now know who you are. You've got to know them, they've got to know you, and then you start to reap the benefits going through of, right, they're actually being able to actually give you these answers, and you know, they start progressing their learning, which is great. Going back through as well, I managed to see the progression from having the really high 80s in terms of the first few weeks. It kind of consistently went through. I think it only ever dropped as low as about 65, and that's really good to see going through. And in terms of, you know, we are here to talk about icebreakers today. It built an atmosphere going through that I was very surprised by. I wasn't expecting everyone to have this massive buy-in as they did, but as soon as they bought into it, they were fully sold on it, and they knew it was going to be happening week in, week out. Simple as that. So in terms of my top tips, again, there should be a slight amendment on this slide, but there is no such thing as a bad icebreaker. Of course, there is a bad icebreaker out there, but just know a line within the limit. The one I found the riskiest has generally been that peanut butter and ketchup one, because a lot of people were like, oh, that's too gross, too this. But at least it stimulated a discussion in the classroom. That was the main part of it. We've already had a little discussion today in terms of the actual Vevox, using, would you rather this, would you rather that, multiple choice question here. And it's how you use these as essentially effectively describe yourself or effectively describe a common task in the day. One of the questions I quite like using is, how easily did you find this room on campus? How easily did you find this lecture room? So hopefully that can be kind of generalized to everybody, hopefully in the school today. And then the last few in this today, before we flip back to the Vevox, is if in doubt, always fight 10 duck-sized horses, because that is the best thing to fight, in my opinion. And I will argue that, whoever would like to argue that, that's fine. So I'm going to flip back to the Vevox one last time, and I'm going to see, hopefully, if this has stuck in today. What makes a good icebreaker question after you just listened to me for the last sort of 30 minutes? And I'm hopeful you've had some tips and tricks thrown in there. I've tried to give some anecdotes, and yeah, let's see what you have for me today, my seminar cohort of about 50 of you. For those of you that joined slightly late, the Vevox code is there. So yeah, I'm seeing it's kind of translating across good, low stakes options, opinion-based, fun, quirky, word cloud, anything, conversations in the word clouds. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this is ideal for me in terms of what I wanted to translate across, which is great. So fantastic, that's good. So hopefully you've taken something from today. And you can see as just sort of a live demo, this is exactly what I do in the classroom. I'll have this Vevox slide up here and I'll start going through it, and you can scroll up, you know, low stakes options, and I'll go through them top to bottom. I'll normally stop it at some point and run it top to bottom. And you can just use it as a stimulation for your own kind of content to keep you talking about this in this case. Right, I think that's perfect. I think I ran slightly quicker than I anticipated. So in that case, I just want to say a big thank you for listening today. Thank you to the Vevox team for giving me the opportunity to present today. And hopefully that was somewhat comprehensible. Everybody's got something from it today. It's quite hard to talk about ice breaking for 30 minutes, and then I'll try to relate it to teaching as best I can. And then, yeah, normally, again, the slide content that I normally do, if you have any questions, I'm always happy to chat to you on email, brw26@aber, and you've seen the way I use that in my actual icebreaker today. I'm Mr. Bruce Wight from Aberystwyth Business School, and any questions should be in the Q&A on the Vevox, hopefully, and I'll pass back over to Fraser now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruce. Hopefully I'm still coming through okay, but yeah, I thought that was brilliant. And I have to sort of candidly say that I've actually seen Bruce run this session a few times before, and each time I always find it just really fun and engaging, and always interested to see what the ratio of Ariana Grande versus Justin Bieber listens is. Yeah, so, we've established that we've got that 50-50 split today. But no, thank you very much, Bruce, once again from my side. We will flick over to the Vevox Q&A in just a second. What I'm just going to do beforehand, however, is just flick back to my screen. So hopefully we are seeing that okay. But yeah, thank you, everybody. And like I said, before we move on to some questions, I just want to very quickly point out a couple of things. So for those of you that have arrived slightly later on in today's session, you know, do not worry, as this session is being recorded and more than likely will eventually be on our YouTube channel at a later date. And speaking of which, we always like to promote our YouTube channel on these sessions. So you can obviously find that, you know, simply by typing in Vevox on the main sort of YouTube page, but equally it's, you know, various places on our website. We post lots of content on there very regularly, sort of tips and tricks videos. All of these sort of pedagogical webinar series can be found on there, as well as things from sort of the business side of the world as well. So definitely encourage everybody to check out the YouTube channel, as well as our sort of newsletter as well. So you can subscribe to the newsletter by subscribing on our main website once again. So just opening up our main website, you'll find it there at the bottom, and that just kind of sort of keeps you in the loop and sort of keeps you involved in sort of product updates and things like that we obviously always like to shout about. So yeah, just a couple of things from me there. Again, just before we move on to some Q&A, also just want to promote the next webinar that's coming up in the sort of autumn webinar series. So the next session following on from today will be on the 19th of October at 2 p.m. And that will be hosted with Dr. Kellyanne Finley at the University of Strathclyde. And I believe the sort of focus and theming for that is kind of center around the Microsoft Teams integration, sort of how the applications of that can kind of come into the Vevox world. So yeah, definitely everybody, you know, if you've enjoyed today's session, sort of want to continue that theme through, recommend you sort of subscribing and joining that session as well as the fact that every Tuesday at 3 p.m. We run a sort of basic Vevox introduction session. So if anybody is here today that's never used Vevox before and is kind of like what they've seen from Bruce's content, you know, sort of maybe feeling like you want to give it a go now yourself, definitely feel free to come along to those sessions. And like I say, it's a quick 15-minute introduction, but also a forum to really ask the team, you know, any questions you have about the platform. So both of those can be found on the webinar section of our main website. And I've got the link here at the bottom of this slide, but obviously, you know, very easily findable on our main website. So I think without further ado, Bruce, if it's okay with you, we'll have a look at some questions from today's session. So I'm going to actually bring up the Vevox Q&A. So obviously lots of people sort of saying hello and welcome. So thank you, everybody. Really appreciate that. Always lovely to see. And yeah, obviously thanks again for joining everybody. Got quite an interesting question here for you, Bruce. Bruce. So someone's asked you here, do you use Vevox in small and large lectures? And do you vary how you use it? And if so, I know you kind of touched upon that a fair bit, but I don't know if you wanted to expand upon that a bit further at all, Bruce.
In terms of actual lecture sessions, I typically teach quite a large cohort. So in this case, it would be the largest side of the lectures, but I have used Vevox in, say, smaller seminar tutorial sessions, because essentially what you can do within a small tutorial, say, of like 10 to 20 students, I quite like having the repeat questions. So in this case, what I've asked them in one seminar for one cohort over here, I've asked again in the second cohort, on the third and the fourth, because I'll be repeating that seminar 4 times to 20 different students. And then in terms of a teaching aid in this case, I can then look at everybody's answers all in one block instead of having to look through 4 separate Vevoxes. So it might be one use in this case. In terms of how do I use it? Again, look at the functionality of the actual questions available to you. I've tried to demo that slightly today with obviously multiple choice, free text, the graph one where you could actually pinpoint how many times I've actually used Vevox in this case. There's a few others like word clouds. I knew word cloud was mentioned on there earlier. And then the other one is, there's quite a nice one with like pin a certain point of the image. I'm trying to use that a little bit more, again, for like identifying points of graphs, those kind of things. But you can use it in small and large in this case. And hopefully that answers the question. Fingers crossed.
That's brilliant.
There is, but yeah.
I think I would completely agree with you, from my perspective as well. There's definitely applications in those smaller and larger cohorts. And I think you've done a really good job sort of demonstrating how both applications can work today. So yeah, thank you for that question, whoever posted that one. Quite an interesting one here. Has an icebreaker ever gone wrong?
I'd say I kind of referenced it earlier, but I wouldn't say it's ever really gone wrong. I would say it was more just the weird reaction to the peanut butter and ketchup one, but it kind of had the reaction I wanted it to do in this case. And I think there's a question about silliness later, but in that case, I then had to just pause the lecture and go, right, everybody laughed it out for 1 minute, get rid of all your giggles, great. Right, now we're going to talk about, in this case, and then what I actually did was with the peanut butter and ketchup question, I then just linked it into the lecture content. So I was talking about production values of like how much ketchup can be produced by a certain business, how much peanut butter can be produced by another certain business, and just linked it in. And then straight away, like 2 weeks down the line, I had like a bunch of my students come up to me, oh yeah, I really understand the peanut butter and ketchup thing. And I was like, okay, great, that worked. Sure, it worked, but it wasn't necessarily the intent, but it kind of translated across. So I wouldn't say it went wrong, but I managed to kind of fix it. And it was one of those potentially slightly silliness, but it worked with the cohort I had. I probably wouldn't use the ketchup and peanut butter again, but do kind of stick to the this or that kind of preemptive sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you've done a really good job, Bruce, of kind of sort of identifying where that line is. But I guess to a degree, in your own capacity, you also work out what feels right for you. You will sort of work out where that formality line is. And I think there is, like you say, a slightly similar question to that below. Yeah, I think that's great. So hopefully, yeah, that's answered that question. So actually, before I open that, there's another one at the top here. So your presentation was very smooth. How do you move so quickly and easily between slides and the Vevox presentation? You happy to take that, Bruce?
I think the best way I can try and show you is just a simple shortcut, Alt and Tab together. If you hold it down, it'll flick back and forth on Microsoft, which is saved me a bunch of times. Yeah, if you can learn shortcuts on Microsoft, please do. It will make your life 1,000 times easier, particularly if you're trying to flip back and forth very quickly, those kind of things. Internally doing it in a PowerPoint is much more difficult, hence why I personally try and keep my Vevox presentation on one side and then my PowerPoint on another. You can integrate the two together. I personally don't, it's my personal preference. You can do both together. It does work quite well. I've done it in the past, but I just prefer it separately. That's just my own preference.
Yeah, I think that's, you pretty much sum that up. It really is a case of just kind of getting used to it. Once you're kind of in your flow and you've used Vevox a number of times, you will just get more seamless at it. So yeah, there's an element of experience there. But yeah, the easiest way if you're wanting to flick between the presentation and the Vevox sort of present view as we are right now is literally just to Alt-Tab as Bruce has highlighted, but also just kind of not being afraid of sort of technical things coming awry. That can occasionally happen, and it's obviously kind of experiencing those is then just kind of getting the confidence to sort of actually use something like Vevox. So yeah, thank you very much for the question. Excellent question there. I think we've got time for a couple more, so we'll go through few more of these. I think we've kind of covered this one quite a bit already, but did you have any final thoughts to add to that, Bruce? Sort of where that line is in terms of the the formality and the sort of silliness and funness of the icebreaker questions.
I wouldn't have like a generic rule for it. You kind of have to have your own gauge and sort of be able to understand that your cohort normally is going to be between 18 and 21. They've normally just come out of secondary school education. In this case, or sorry, upper six, whatever it's now called, post-16 education, that sort of thing. They're now in higher education. And in this case, what I found is they kind of always expect you to constantly just be throwing information at them. My own personal teaching belief is they're not here to essentially, get everything spoon-fed to them. So with this, it's the kind of, have a strict formal line, but also be able to go to an informal level where they don't feel uncomfortable to discuss a point. You actually want to be actively challenging them, and that's my kind of belief in that sense. In terms of the silliness, formality, boundary, you have to be able to find it for yourself. I think for me, the duck questions like bang on the line. I think anything different, if you started, going a bit more kind of controversial or really, really silly, you're not going to get the response you need back. It's that sort of have a silly question, but make sure you can actually have a structured conversation about the silly question. And if you can find that balance, fantastic. Always feel free to use the duck size horse question and all that kind of stuff. It does work pretty well in my experience, but you have to deliver it in the right way.
Totally, Bruce. And I think, you kind of said it best, really. You'll sort of find out where that line is for you. And if you can turn those sort of questions into, something else, like an after the fact discussion, like, the example you gave around the peanut butter allergy, that obviously that's actually quite an important thing that came to light from that simple icebreaker. So sometimes you don't always see the sort of after the fact sort of elements that can come through from those. So obviously really important as well. So no, that's brilliant. I know we're sort of coming to the end of time, guys, so we'll go through a couple more of these questions.
Yep.
Sort of 3-4 minutes left of the session. So this question here is asking us, have you ever used it for hybrid sessions, so students joining in the classroom online? Another really good question, Bruce. I guess from your portrayal of today's session, generally this is from a in-class sort of type setting that you're specifically giving, because I know you mentioned about sort of students putting their hand up and those sorts of things. But what are your thoughts on sort of the hybrid environment as well for this?
So naturally, obviously, everyone's had their own kind of teaching progression where some people have had to do a hybrid or whatever the high flex model was called, those kind of things. Aberystwyth now is going back to all in person. The year before, I was actually running this in a hybrid scenario. So everything you've seen today with the Ariana Grande question, stuff like that, with the first 6 weeks of term, with everything coming out of the pandemic, those things, these sessions were hybrid because I had people joining me on Teams for the first 6 weeks. I then had a classroom full of 90 people. So in terms of saying like a 50-50 split of 45 students in the classroom, 45 of them on Teams, I've not had that kind of experience. In terms of actually using it for hybrid sessions, it can be seamless as well. All you need to do in this case is just use Teams, share your screen, and it's very similar to what I've done today in terms of with this webinar. And then the main thing is, if you're using Vevox in this case, you need to be able to still interact with everybody in terms of, if you've got the Vevox on the screen, it doesn't matter who's actually inputting, whether it's somebody in the room on the phone or somebody that's on a virtual machine on Microsoft Teams. The main thing is you interact with that Vevox poll, you bring that Vevox poll to life. It's ultimately you as the lecturer or the presenter of what you're using today to actually get the people involved with that Vevox.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think just to add my sort of 2 cents to that, I think, we always promote Vevox to be used in, both the sort of in classroom and hybrid environment, or fully online as well. So, Vevox can be used in all of those avenues. It's really just kind of sort of how you sort of make use of that. And, the only sort of thing you may be lacking is that live, in the room sort of reaction. But you're still going to get that online as well. It's just kind of a different way. But actually, the process, if you will, and the functionality is always the same, regardless of whether we're presenting, in a classroom or virtually as we are today. Something like the Q&A board, for example, you're getting that sort of consolidation of, in-class sort of participants and online as well. So, I think from that point of view, Vevox always works great in both avenues, but you're always going to have your own sort of personal preference and flavour to that as well.
Yeah.
I think just looking at time, we'll potentially just look at one more question here. Someone has said here, All right.
No.
Okay. I think this is in response to the how you sort of seamlessly move between. Yep. So that's a very good point as well. Yes. Thank you for that.
I don't use Mac, so good to know.
Neither do I, unfortunately. But obviously, we are aware that there are a lot of Mac users out there. So yeah, great tip. And we'll finish up, I think, then with this question, and any that we haven't managed to get to today. Potentially, we can maybe sort of circulate afterwards, Bruce. And if you've got time, we can maybe sort of jot some answers, sort of, and get them circulated out at a later point. So this final one is asking us: have you ever used Vevox plugin between PowerPoint and browser for today's presentation? So obviously, Bruce has kind of talked about that one. You know, he doesn't specifically use the PowerPoint add-in. You know, everything that he's done today has been both separately in his PowerPoint deck and in the Vevox session. But obviously, we do have. I say obviously, as you may not know, but we do have a fully functioning PowerPoint add-in for Vevox as well, and you can find out more information about that on the website and through various other channels. But if you were to use that, essentially you could run your polling questions directly from the PowerPoint deck, so you're actually not having that process of switching between the sort of two entities. What I will say though is it is a sort of pros and cons situation, so there are things that PowerPoint add-in can do and may be useful for that the sort of native present view can't do, but then vice versa. There's things such as the Q&A board, for example, as we've got here, that we can't actually get access to natively from the PowerPoint add-in. So it really depends on your workflow and how you like to sort of teach. But also on that point, we're actually on the cusp of releasing a new PowerPoint add-in very shortly as well, and that's going to have some additional functionality. Fortunately, I can't give any exact dates as of yet, as it's kind of going through the final sort of processing and QA steps currently, but it will be very soon. So obviously, keep an eye out for that as well. Yeah, another great question. Thank you very much. And I think we are pretty much just over time now. So I think, Bruce, thank you very much. Really, appreciate your time today. And obviously, it's been a great session. Like I say, I know I've seen you've run this, Icebreakers session a number of times now, but it never ceases to sort of bring a
much appreciated. Thank you.
So no reason to win. And thank you, and obviously thank you everybody for joining today. And I hope it's been really useful and giving you inspiration and sort of motivation to maybe now sort of potentially looking at doing Vevox for yourself. So yeah, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to end the session. Thank you to everybody again, and to yourself, Bruce, and hope everybody has a good rest of the afternoon and week ahead. And thank you very much.